do have a snack story to tell you. Music fading is our cue to get things rolling. I want to welcome you all here to this Cracking the Cancer Code in Science in the Cinema event. My name's Joe Dort. I'm your moderator tonight. I'm really thrilled to see this all come together. We've been planning it now for many, many months and a lot of moving parts, and it's good to see it all come together. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an otolaryngologist, head and neck surgeon, and I specialize in treating head and neck cancer. I also work at the University of Calgary, where I'm an emeritus professor in the departments of surgery and community health sciences, as well as oncology. I'm also affiliated with the Cumming School of Medicine, which is part of the University of Calgary, and I'm a proud card-carrying member of the Charbonneau Cancer Institute, which you'll learn a little bit about tonight. So, now that you've heard about me, I want to get on with the rest of the program. Tonight we're going to be seeing a film that tells a different part. Most of the time our cancer story is about how we diagnose cancer, how we find new ways to cure cancer, how we treat and manage this disease. Tonight we're going to take a little bit of a different spin on things and talk about what happens to people who actually survive the cancer treatment that they've been subjected to. So the people who are supposedly cured of their cancer, I don't think the journey ends then, and this film that our friend and colleague Bill Brummel's put together, I think is going to shed some light on that. And then afterwards, we have this panel of experts that includes researchers as well as patients and clinicians. And you'll have an opportunity to ask them some questions if you have any burning questions, and I'm hoping some of you do. Now, before I go any further, I want to first begin by recognizing the ancestral territories, cultures, and oral practices of the Blackfoot people. The University of Calgary is located in the heart of southern Alberta, and at the University of Calgary, we acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7. And these include the Blackfoot Confederacy, which are comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary, as some of you might know, is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Now, this is the 5th episode of the Cracking the Cancer Code series, and I've said already, I think this is the first sold-out event in the series, so we're pretty excited about that. Tonight, I think we're quite excited to be putting our own spin on things with both the Ohlson Research Initiative, the Cumming School of Medicine, and the Charbonneau Cancer Institute supporting this. And for those of you who don't know, this is the first time in Canada this film is being seen in its full length. Bill is presented at conferences in the eastern part of our country where he's shown selected clips, but you're the first people in the country to see this entire film. Now, it takes a lot of people and supportive partners to put something like this on, and I particularly want to thank a few people before I go any farther. Dr. Carasaro, who you'll meet on the panel, she's here working with Julie tonight to help with communication, is an important member of our research team, a very skilled and effective health services researcher. I'd also like to thank Ali Miller, Michelle Kavanaugh, Carmen Coelho, and Andrea Mendizabal for their help in shaping and organizing and ultimately delivering this event. And of course, thanking the Ohlson Research Initiative and the Charbonneau Cancer Institute for supporting it. And finally, I want to thank the Calgary Public Library and their team who've allowed us to use this facility and have been really great on the tech support side of things. So thank you all for that. The work that we're doing at the Ohlson Research Initiative and the Charbonneau Cancer Center is going to really be impacted. I don't know, I think everybody in the room has probably seen the new Cancer Center, at least from the outside. I don't think anybody's allowed to tour inside of it quite yet. Maybe some people have been, but not me. This building is actually supposed to be more than a building, and I think programs like ours are only going to be stronger as a result of this, because it's an innovative space that's designed to bring patients and families together with clinicians and clinical care teams, and also with researchers. And the idea is for researchers, clinicians, patients, families to be working together. And when that happens, you can create a learning system, a learning care environment that is not possible with people working in their silos. So this new cancer center is designed to do that. And this is one of the big things I think most of us are excited about. Now, with the support of the Alberta Health Services, the Government of Alberta, Children's Hospital Research Foundation, Alberta Cancer Foundation, a lot has been invested in this building, but there's still more that has to happen. And so there's an Own Cancer campaign. For those of you who haven't seen the brochures at the back, have a look again on your way out, because I think the goal, in addition to what's been built there physically, is to try and attract some of the best minds and give them the tools that they need to do their best work in order to deliver the right care to the right patient at the right time, and to learn something about the impact of the treatment that we do, which is something we don't do terribly well in healthcare right now, and I think this cancer center has an opportunity to allow us to do that. So support from the community to help this institution go is going to be really important. So now, why are we all here? I think events like this idea came from Julie, one of our panelists. She first told us about the film, Can You Hear My Voice? And when she planted that seed, we started the wheels turning in our heads and came up with the idea that wouldn't sharing this film with a larger audience made up of people from the community and people from the care community as well be something really, really cool? And that's how we went down this path. That was over 6 months ago. I think it was last fall. And this is where we've ended up today. So this Patient Advisory Council, we always talk about listening to the voice of the patient. In our program, I think we actually try to do that. So Julie, thanks for planting the seed and helping us make it grow. I don't know, for those of you who know something about head and neck cancer, what I'm going to tell you is old news, but for many people, there are almost 8,000 Canadians a year affected by head and neck cancer, and over a quarter of those people die every year from that disease. So it's important. And like I mentioned earlier, although we do focus on better diagnosis, better treatment, better short-term outcomes, the long-term impact of this disease and the treatment of this disease is something worth spending some time and attention on, and that's the theme for tonight. Afterwards, you've had a chance to if you're a speed reader, you can read the bios up there. I'm not going to read them to you, but we have a panel of experts that are going to be ready, willing, and able to take your questions and hopefully answer them. So now that you know the format of the evening, let's get on to the main event. And who better to introduce the film than the man who created it from his own personal experience. Bill has unique opportunity of having a background as a skilled filmmaker who also had maybe the good fortune to be affected by head and neck cancer and the impact, the long-term impact of what that treatment imposed on him. So he's put together this compelling story, which I haven't seen yet. I've only seen the trailer, so I'm really looking forward to seeing it. And I think without me saying anything else, Bill, I want you to come up and share a few words.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you all for coming out and braving the rainy weather. I'm eager to share the film with you. And I'm honored and humbled to share the stage after the film with this outstanding panel. The story of how the film came to be is intertwined with my cancer journey. In 2016, because of long-term damage from radiation treatments I underwent for tonsil cancer 19 years prior to 2016, I was forced to have a laryngectomy. Losing your natural voice is traumatic. From the time that we learn to speak, much of our self-identity and how we perceive ourselves is wrapped up in the sound of our natural voice. Physical recovery for me from the laryngectomy surgery was awful. But worse yet, I was saddled with insecurity and fear and doubt. Laryngectomized persons often tend to retreat from society and withdraw into a world where we don't have to speak, eat, or be seen in public. But when we self-quarantine, loneliness and depression are sure to follow. There were times where I found it easier to isolate rather than navigate. I was severely depressed. In fact, if you had told me, say 6 months before my laryngectomy, that I was going to have to spend the rest of my life speaking with an artificial voice and breathing through a hole in my neck, I would have told you that you could find me in my bed in the fetal position for the rest of my life. But that's not what happened. And it's not because I'm the least bit extraordinaire. It's because and I really believe this, it's because I'm like everybody else. I'm like you and you and you. We are all stronger and more resilient than we know. Sometimes it just takes overwhelming adversity for us to find that out, and the right people there to help you find that inner strength. I was blessed to have a supportive network after my surgery, including my wife, my family, my friends, a laryngectomy support group, to encourage me and aid in my recuperation. And just as importantly, my medical team at Keck Medicine of USC in Los Angeles helped me take control of my own recovery by offering a holistic and integrative approach to cancer care. I went to weekly speech, swallowing, and physical therapy sessions. I did daily stretching exercises. My wife and I attended 2 support groups, still do. I practiced deep breathing. I started to eat a healthier diet. And most of all, I think, for me anyway, I started a walking regimen that began with, I think it began with walking 2 houses down and back, but eventually led to 4 or 5 mile hikes 6 days a week. Slowly, I regained confidence and realized my life had just changed. It was not over. It was just changed. Then, about a year after my surgery, my surgeon and doctor, he's been my surgeon for, 15 years, at a regular follow-up checkup, he suggested that I make a film about the psychosocial aspects of recovering from a laryngectomy and living without a voice box. My first impression was, stick to medicine, doc. Now I'm the expert. Just kidding, it really was a wonderful idea. But it was just a topic. It wasn't a story. So I went home right after the appointment, fired up the Google machine, and very quickly was floored when I came across the Shouted Cancer organization and the Shouted Cancer choir. I was impressed with their use of singing techniques and breathing techniques to improve vocal pitch and strength in laryngectomized persons, thereby improving self-confidence and self-image. Now, from a film producer perspective, the idea of a bunch of people without voice boxes singing in a choir leapt out of me. It's what we call a hook or a high concept idea. But I knew, and more importantly, I knew that I was in a unique position as a filmmaker and as a laryngectomized person to tell this story with the needed sensitivity. And I knew that the choir would be the perfect vehicle for telling the story I wanted to tell, that of a group of cancer patients who are living through and suffering through all the physical and emotional hardships that a cancer diagnosis brings, but still leading productive, meaningful, and joyful lives. Now, it's one thing to have an idea for a film. It's another thing to make it a reality. The streets of Hollywood are littered with good ideas. I was able to convince a mix of 5 charitable foundations and corporations to help fund the film. Chief among them was Atos Medical. And for those of you who had a laryngectomy, you know exactly who Atos Medical is. And the film simply could not have been made without them. And, you know, anytime I introduce the film, I have to say my deepest thanks go out to the Shouted Cancer organization and the choir members. They allowed me, and more importantly, my crew, cameras, lights, sound people, into their inner circle. They revealed in the interviews and their actions, their suffering that they've been through, but more importantly, their strength and resilience and steadfast determination. I think in doing so, they are one model of what cancer survivorship can look like. I'm going to wrap it up and leave you to watch the film. I'm going to watch the film with you, actually. But I do want to say how grateful I am to the people at the Charbonneau Cancer Institute, Cumming School of Medicine, and the Ohlson Research Center for making all of this tonight happen. So enjoy the film. I think you may shed a tear during the film, but I also think you'll laugh and cheer for this choir and their members. So, as they say in Hollywood, roll the film, or more truthfully, play the digital file.
I'd never seen that. I've never seen that before. It was mind-blowing. Well done, Bill.
Thank you very
Well
much.
done. That was...
Thank you.
So I've prepared a few questions for our panelists, so I'm going to give you people some time to think about your own. And we have a couple of people up there with microphones to run around, so you can save your own vocal cords if you have them.
You're lucky if you had them.
Yeah. I'm going to start with Julie, okay? And so Kara's here to help Julie with her response, I think, but you guys have worked out the details. But Julie's had a really special experience with cancer. She developed this laryngeal cancer, very advanced one, at the age of 18. And that is off the charts rare. And so as a result of that, I mean, she's much older than 18 now, so you've lived with it for a long time. And along the way, you've faced many challenges. But despite that, you've found a way to live your life and be very successful. And I know your journey's been a real inspiration for many of us, as well as many cancer survivors, both young and old. And so I have a couple of questions I've asked you. So of the many roadblocks you've faced, which ones have been the most difficult, and how did you find the strength to overcome and live with them? And the second question is a little bit challenging. You know, I'm going to ask you to give some advice. And do you have any advice for someone who's facing cancer and its treatment?
Is it on? Oh, it is on. So for the first question, so thankfully Julie has prepared some answers for me to read. So with regards to the roadblocks, so losing my ability to speak normally was one of the toughest challenges I faced in the years since treatment. I can't do simple things like make a phone call or speak to a large audience like this one. Being intentional and creative in how I approach these challenges has helped me to cope and adapt. We all face difficulties in life, and most of the time we have no control over what comes our way. But we always have the opportunity to decide how we choose to respond. I used to feel very sorry for myself and think, why me? But eventually I realized it didn't matter. This was the hand that life dealt me, so it was up to me to make the most of what I had to work with. That's why my mantra, and her signature on her email, is a quote from Dr. Carl Jung, a famous psychologist. It says, "I am not what happened to me, but I am what I chose to become." I truly believe the reason I survived cancer was to help others. This is why I do research looking at integrative oncology strategies such as nutrition and probiotics to help others affected by cancer. My purpose gives me strength.
Thanks for that.
So the advice she has for those facing cancer and its treatment: every storm runs out of rain. This will pass. Don't be afraid to ask for help and to seek out whatever supports you may need. You don't always have to be brave. Don't be afraid to advocate for what you need or find someone who can help you do that. It's important to understand that after cancer, you don't just get to go back to who you were. Cancer changes us whether we like it or not, but nobody tells you that, and it doesn't start to dawn on you until the dust begins to settle. So it's important to take the time you need to process things. And learning to practice self-compassion is one of the most valuable tools you can use. I think we could all use a little bit more self-compassion.
So Bill, I have a couple
Yes.
of questions for you. This, what we've just witnessed, was a pretty incredible demonstration of your ability to tell a good story. And, you know, a couple of things arise from that. I wonder how does the final version of the film, the one we just saw, compared to what you had in mind when you started the project? And then to follow on, how did making this film affect you personally?
Well, in terms of the structure of the film, scenes of the choir rehearsing and performing and interspersing that with personal stories, that structure was exactly what I envisioned at the start. However, the narratives of the personal stories changed quite a bit. At least some of them changed quite a bit. I mean, making documentary films is both exciting and maddening in that you go out with an outline of what you think is going to happen, and half the time it doesn't happen. And so you have to adjust and be flexible and go with the flow. A couple of examples of that in the film the poem that Sarah read at the end. I didn't even know about that until 2 days before we went out to their house. And she, after one of the rehearsals, she came up to me and said, Bill, I don't know if this is something you want, but I wrote this poem 6 months ago for Nigel, and I haven't given it to him yet. I haven't read it to him yet. And I said, don't read it to him. Wait. And so it really was the first time Nigel heard that poem, and I thought that was just the perfect way to conclude Sarah's segment. Sarah is such an emotive character, and as a documentary filmmaker, we love that. We love it when a person cries on camera. But seriously, I mean, she was fantastic. Bug's story was completely different than what you saw in the film, as I had outlined. In a research interview, Bug's wife, Kat, and Bug told me about a story where they went to a pub, as they call it in England, about 2 months after Bug's surgery. And Bug went to get a beer at the bar, and apparently some man at the bar was making fun of Bug and the way he sounded. And he didn't tell Kat about that until like a week later. And Kat flipped. She wanted to go back to the bar, find the guy, and she said, kill him. I think she was, being metaphorical, but so that was what I intended. The arc of that story was Bug adjusting to how you sound with a laryngectomy. But when we did the interview with the family at the table, everybody was just blown away by Bug's daughter, Lily. She is so in touch with her feelings for a 12-year-old. And I thought, well, switch gears and let's try and focus this story on the family dynamic of a cancer diagnosis. And so we did that. So the stories changed a lot. The format did not change a lot. And what was the other question?
How it might have affected you personally?
It was really cathartic and cleansing to me. Seeing the choir perform and rehearse made me realize I could expand the boundaries of what I expect for myself and what I think is possible, even with the limitations that I have. So that was the biggest thing. And it also reaffirmed my belief in the power of art and music to heal, to inspire, to generate empathy. Singing releases stress and releases endorphins. Communal singing can foster community and social inclusion, and I think that's a really big part of the movie, and I think a really big part of why Shouted Cancer has struck a chord.
Okay, thank you. We're going to shift gears a little bit. We've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about voice, but Alana, I'm going to ask you a question about some of your experience. I've known you for a long, long time and seen you work with many patients over those years, helping them with their voices, but also helping them improve their swallowing. And one of the impacts that some of these treatments have on people is a real impact on someone's ability to swallow. And so there's a lot of work that goes into improving that after major surgery and radiation. So what I wondered, Alana, from you was, of all the things you do with your patients, what part of what you do helps them the most? And then whether you could share with us some insight into what the impact of poor swallowing has on people's lives. We've got an understanding of the vocal things now, but I'd like to know what you think you do that's most helpful, and what the impact of swallowing is on your patients.
Well, I think what's interesting about swallowing is that it, much like the voice, is just a core function that humans have. So when you start altering even a little bit something like voice or swallowing, it's pretty profound to the person. And I think that certainly supporting the patients as far as giving them the knowledge of what's happening, literally what's going on when they're swallowing. You're safe, you're not safe, these consistencies would help, this position, different things. But I'd like to believe what we do, or what I do with them in addition to that, is very similar to the laryngectomies, is that I offer a level of support, hopefully, because it is so multi-layered. I think the director of the choir talked about the laryngectomies being multi-layered as far as the impact of what they've been through. And I think certainly swallowing is part of that, whether it's an oral resection or a total laryngectomy. And that's one thing Bill and I think Julie and I were talking about, is just the effects after a total laryngectomy of swallowing as well. We think of the big impact from things like the oral cancer resections or the radiation for those tumors, pharyngeal tumors, but actually laryngectomies suffer quite significantly with swallowing difficulties, and to the point that it actually does affect their voice. So some of those laryngectomies undoubtedly are having dilatations. Bill was talking about, he actually self-dilates at home in order to have an open space, not only to swallow, but to have the vibratory capacity to get decent voice. So I think, I'm not sure if I answered your question. I think that at least as much as the functional aspects of helping them both help them understand what's going on with the swallowing and helping them slowly rehabilitate it, is also the level of support for those changes. And I feel like, for me, I hope that my patients feel that too, is not only with the laryngectomies changing their prostheses or doing whatever technical aspects I have to do, but that I can offer them that support to understand that the rain does pass, as Julie so aptly pointed out. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a technical part to what you do, but what you're talking about is maybe in some ways the more important or impactful part might be not in the technical domain, but in the time you spend with people listening and sharing your perspective. I mean, that's what I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the technical, it's hard to separate the two out when you're dealing with the head and neck population, cancer population, because they are so intimately twined. You definitely, as a speech pathologist, have to help with the technical aspects of either the swallowing or the voice. But I think it's really important for me to feel like I'm there for them fairly quickly when they are struggling with something, especially in those early months after surgery.
You think?
Chime in really quickly. I just want to say that speech therapists and speech pathologists are people who've had a laryngectomy. They're our main contact. We go see them more than we see a doctor or any other clinician. And a good speech therapist can lessen the weight of the surgery, not only helping us with the technical aspect of speaking, but with the emotional recovery as well. And a good speech therapist will do that.
She's good.
Yeah, I always say when I meet a speech therapist, speech therapist, even before I've heard them speak, I love you, because I love what you do.
Okay,
So,
just tone it down.
Okay.
That's for later. Let's move on. It's okay, Ali, I'm under control. Linda, So I don't know how many of you know Linda, but she's a world-class groundbreaking researcher in this domain we call integrative oncology. And what she does really appeals to me in some ways because it's very practical, it's very applied. And so the knowledge that she creates and the stuff that she learns and shares with us all has a lot of application. And so I wanted Linda to tell us a little bit about when she looks at the work she's done, and I mean there's a lot of it. I wonder what she feels among all the things that she's done are the most impactful, the things that patients and families, to help patients and families do to help them return to their best functioning selves. So where is the highest impact that you've done? And then I have a couple of political type questions. I'll get you to answer that first one first. They're not that political.
Sure. And I don't think that's the question I was given in advance, but perhaps it was.
No, it was. It was about impact.
I was thinking about how it, as I was watching the film, and it's the second time I've seen it in its entirety, and there were parts I didn't even remember. I'm sure every time you see it, you feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's...
Well, I look at the things I wish I would have done differently.
Of course. But wonderful because it illustrates so many of the themes that we study scientifically within the fields of psychosocial oncology, which is the psychological, the social, the emotional aspects of living with cancer for both the person diagnosed and the family, and integrative oncology, which is around integrating complementary therapies along with conventional care. And so the broad spectrum there is looking at things like support groups, it's looking at creative therapies, it's looking at things like mindfulness, self-compassion, nutrition. And as I watch the film, it's sort of checking all the boxes. And I'm like, this is a much more entertaining way. I should show this to all my students because it illustrates a lot of the concepts that, a lot of the foci of the interventions that we do that we know from the research help people cope. So social support. I mean, we see that, and as people said, being together as a group, not just to talk about how we're feeling, which is beneficial, but also to have a shared project, a shared goal. We know that creative therapies are a wonderful way to express emotions, to work through difficult emotions. And there's a concept that we call post-traumatic growth in the literature, and we know that when people are able to achieve post-traumatic growth, they have better outcomes. And it's, again, exactly what we see is you go through a really difficult traumatic experience. There is often a low, where people are having a hard time, but then they're able in some way to see a silver lining, as it were, or use it as a catalyst to be resilient, to rebound, to thrive in a difficult situation. And we saw that so nicely in the film. So it really illustrates so well many of the evidence-based kind of interventions that we study within psychosocial and integrative oncology.
Thank you. I wanted to know your opinion about a couple of things. Well, first of all, one of the things that struck me as a clinician, and in our program, we're quite involved in exercise, for example, as an intervention to help people either prepare themselves better for treatment and or recover better afterwards. And as you know, the exercise literature, there's abundant literature and research telling us what a valuable intervention that might be. And yet, despite that evidence, that type of intervention is not part of any routine clinical workflow. So I wondered what your thoughts were around some of the biggest barriers to people accessing the kind of survivorship experience you think would be most helpful to them. And then your thoughts on what role you think the new Cancer Center could or should play in making this more part of standard care.
I think some of the barriers are that it just takes so much time for new ideas and new interventions to go from knowing that they're helpful to transitioning into mainstream care because it's such a slow-moving sort of monster organization. So there's the sort of conventional treatments, your chemotherapy, your surgery, your radiation therapy that are well supported. But we know, as you said, that people do better on those conventional treatments when they do have exercise as a prehabilitation. It's the #1 treatment for fatigue, which is the #1 problem in cancer survivors. There are clinical practice guidelines now, so within the integrative oncology world, that's one way we try to move things into the mainstream, is by getting them in these clinical practice guidelines. So the #1 body of oncologists in the world, the American Society of Clinical Oncology, recommends mindfulness-based interventions for people with cancer. It's published in their high-impact journals. And so the challenge for people like myself and other advocates of these therapies is convincing the powers that be that these are just as important as the conventional treatments. And that's a work in progress. We have made steps. I think in the new Cancer Center, there is an expanded psychosocial oncology program. There is space now for the first time ever for integrative oncology within the Cancer Center. We have a clinic where patients can be referred and get personalized treatment plans that integrate conventional and complementary care. So we are making strides. I think it's just something that takes a lot of time and a lot of many layers of support. And actually, people like yourselves in the audience who are living with cancer to advocate for these kinds of services. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So now to Wayne, who is a very busy head and neck surgeon, and in that world, you've had the opportunity to really help a lot of people overcome their cancer. But as you and I both know, many of those people have a lot of challenges to face after treatment. And so one of those very frustrating side effects of a lot of the oral resections that we do is abnormal swallowing. And I wondered if you, looking at your clinical experience, and also Wayne's a very active researcher in this area as well. So based on your clinical and research experience in these swallowing disorders, what factors do you think are the most important in predicting longer-term outcomes, longer-term swallowing outcomes in your patients? So more than 1 year out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and more years out.
Thank you. So, I can think it really relates to what a lot of people have said here and the film. There's two aspects. There's the hand that you're dealt and then how it's played. So there are things you can't control. We're talking about people with oral cancers. The age of the person is going to affect their prognosis as far as rehabilitation. People that have any sort of underlying neurologic problem going in are going to have more trouble because they already have some deficit. And then there's the cancer. Where in your mouth is it? If it's on your cheek, not to minimize it, but your swallowing is probably going to be very good and your speech will be very good. If you're losing a lot of your tongue, not so much. So where it is and how advanced that cancer is, because that determines what needs to be removed. So I'll stick to talking about cancers of the tongue. That's the most common site. But if the cancer is lateralized on the tongue, so you remove less than half, and you do proper reconstruction, people swallow quite well, and their speech is not normal, but it's quite good. If you lose both sides of your tongue at the front and the floor of mouth, you're going to have a lot more trouble with speech, a lot more trouble handling food in your mouth, and it will affect your swallowing as well. And most significantly, if you lose your tongue at the back, as you know, the oral pharynx, the base of the tongue, then that really is going to impact swallowing. And so what can you do to maximize the person's function? In the operating room, it's really more the reconstructive surgeons. I did reconstructive surgery till a year ago, and then sort of a young man's game, so that's not my role anymore. With modern reconstructive techniques, that is taking tissue from elsewhere in the body, you can maximize function. So you want to maximize the amount of mobility the tongue has. You don't want it to be tethered down by a flap. That's what we call this tissue we transfer that's too small. You want it to have enough bulk, though, because to have speech and swallowing, the tongue, including the reconstructed tongue, needs to be able to reach your palate, the roof of your mouth, and close that space when you speak and when you swallow. So there are things that can be done in the operating room, but I think the biggest thing really is what you've touched on before with Alana is the rehabilitation. And you've heard from Alana, I mean, the speech-language pathologist does the real grunt work here, the bulk of the work. It's really a lot of coaching and reassuring, but also setting practical limits for safety. It's not just cheerleading, there are limits, and you have to keep people safe. And then the final thing, which again was shown so brilliantly in the film, is the resilience of the people themselves. So to overcome the effects of head and neck cancer and its treatment, whether it's voice, speech, swallowing, or neck range of motion, shoulder function, it takes a tremendous amount of work on behalf of the patients. Unfortunately, there's no free ride in this business for patients. They really have to put in the time and the effort, and it becomes a major focus of their life to maximize how they're doing. And you got to be careful when you say things like that. You never want to put it in a position that if someone is not functioning well, they just didn't try, or it's somehow their fault. That's not what I'm saying, but you're not going to get to where you might be without a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of support.
Yeah, it's one of the factors for sure. Okay, thank you. So, over to you people. Who's got some questions? Somebody must have a question. Not that I can see if anybody's hand is up. Oh, good. I don't need to see. I just need to shut up.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I guess I should stand up, eh? Yep. I'm a retired physician, and I recall in medical school and residency that we were always encouraged not to label or talk about the patients as the disease, and that's very different in the film, but everyone in the film was comfortable with that, and I'm just curious how that's happened over time.
Well, if I can take that. In the film, everybody except Sarah refers to themselves as a laryngectomy. I used to refer to myself as a laryngectomy. And Sarah actually introduced what you introduced to me. And so my feelings have evolved. But most I don't want to put a percentage to it, but certainly the majority of people in the community don't feel like it's a slight of any sort, and they refer to themselves as a laryngectomy or a Larry. In fact, on Facebook, there's a whole group that's called Larry's Speakeasy, and they're a great group, though. They provide a lot of support. They provide free supplies to patients who can't afford them. So, yeah, I think my thinking is still evolving on that. If you notice in my presentation, I said laryngectomized persons, and a lot of people that's the term that a lot of people are using instead of laryngectomy.
And I'll maybe just chime in too. I did notice, Bill, that you changed your presentation there, because that is something we think about in the world of psychosocial oncology. And I refer to people living with cancer. Some people don't like the term cancer survivor. So I think it's up to the individuals living with cancer to decide how they want to refer to themselves. Sure. But for me as a professional, I use kind of the more descriptive term, person living with cancer during treatment, after treatment. So that's kind of the way I approach it as a professional.
And the reason that my thinking involved, it was really, Sarah just explained to me that she finds it offensive. And I said, if she finds it offensive, there's got to be some other in the population that find it offensive.
And it's the same with mental health in general. You don't
Yeah.
talk about schizophrenics, you talk
Yeah,
about people
yeah.
with schizophrenia because
Right.
it's the person
Exactly,
is the core. Yeah.
exactly. So,
Okay. Did you want to pipe in, Julie, or ask? Or? Who's next?
Up here.
Good question.
Back in 1972, oh boy, okay, I met a man who had a laryngectomy, and he spoke by gulping up air from his esophagus. Seemed to be very difficult for him to do, and he was certainly quite difficult to understand. And I'm just wondering about the progression of different treatments between 1972 and now. You're certainly very understandable with these prosthetics.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a good question, and it is exactly what you noticed. Back then, it's called esophageal speech, and essentially it was months and years, really, to develop functional speech, and I'm going to say 50% of the patients, even who undertook intense therapy, never got there. Certainly not lengthy, sentences. You could get the occasional word, couple words together. There were some really good ones, but not tons, because you just don't have the same access to pulmonary air, and that's really what revolutionized voice. And it was many years ago now that a guy named Eric Blom in Indianapolis, speech pathologist and a head and neck surgeon, developed this prosthesis, and it really did revolutionize rehabilitation for the total laryngectomy because it had access very quickly to pulmonary air, so much more volume, therefore much more length of speech, and more to the point, very quickly rehabilitated. We often will have patients leaving the unit who've got a word or two. We can establish a voice, and then it very quickly comes within a couple of weeks after. But yeah, the only downside to the prostheses, of course, is that they leak. Eventually, the backside leaks, and the esophageal flap that allows the air out to vibrate the tissue starts to leak, and then they need to be changed, and there's a wide range of how often that needs to happen. Every couple of weeks for some. How often do you have to have it done, Bill?
generally about once every 5 months.
Yeah.
But I've had some that last a week.
Right. And that is really the challenge. I know there's a couple of laryngectomies in the audience that have, one in particular has been going through a real process of us trying to troubleshoot and find out what's going to work best with adequate voice, but not having to have the prosthesis changed every day and a half. So,
Are there differences between the different products, like in terms of challenges?
yeah, really good question. Actually, there's two major developers, actually the only two at all, actually. One is this Blom-Singer product, which is sold in Canada through InHealth Canada, and then the Provox, the Atos, which Bill was speaking with, and it looked like most of the patients in the UK use. The Provox tend to last a little bit longer, but can be a lot more difficult to get stronger voice. A lot of people like the Blom-Singer prostheses. They're simpler, there's less bulk to the prosthesis and less effort therefore. But if you're prone to leaking, that can be a struggle. So yeah, depends on the patient, and that's where the troubleshooting and can go on for a long time. Very rarely does a laryngectomy have the good fortune to have one prosthesis that lasts them the entire time they need them.
And you use both?
Yeah, I use both. Yeah. And there's
And-
various kinds in both of those product lines. There's various types of different things, increased resistance, a dual valve in the back, enlarged esophageal flange for leaking, all sorts of different options. What were you going to say, Bill?
I was just going to go back to esophageal speech. I know one woman in Omaha, Nebraska, who was about 35, 40. She's an expert esophageal speaker, but they are few and far between.
Absolutely.
Okay, who's
We
ne-
have
oh,
one,
there's,
we have one more up here.
Okay, one, and then there's one down here. Front row, well, almost front row.
There has been a terrific head and neck cancer support group in Calgary, and it stopped in April because the coordinator of it retired. And now there's going to be nothing until next April when somebody takes his place. And I wondered, especially watching this, when they stressed how helpful the support group was, if anything can be done in this year of no support group, if any of you are willing to take it on, or if you are aware of the problem, or if we could have a different person every month doing it. I know that being a head and neck cancer person, I feel like it saved my life because I found a group of my peers and a forum for talking about things and understanding that I was normal for that group. I miss it, and I wonder if there's any progress there.
So I think this is such a good question at a number of levels, and it gets at what I was touching base with Linda about, is that support group isn't part of our integrated cancer system, really, is it? It's a volunteer thing, and the previous coordinator did it for many years as a volunteer activity, and this is what you're saying is what you experienced was extremely valuable, and yet we haven't found a way to provide that as part of our routine processes of care. Anybody want to take it over? Linda?
Yeah, I mean, we do within psychosocial oncology do a number of support groups that are disease specific. So we have, breast cancer, and we have adolescent, young adult groups, and we do have a clinician who works specifically with head and neck cancer, but he's just retired. So there is a possibility within psychosocial resources to start up a professionally led support group. It really is just a matter of resources, and if there's enough interest. The other option is through Wellspring, potentially. Where was the other group run through? It was through Wellspring. Oh, well, Guy's at psychosocial, yeah. So, yeah, so he's retired. We will be assigning someone else to do head and neck cancer through psychosocial resources, so certainly could look into bringing that back to life. And if Wellspring had said next April, I'm not sure what they had in mind. It's not something that I've...
And there is a laryngectomy group that is supported by laryngectomies.
Right, so this was more broad for head and neck cancers more generally, yeah.
Yeah, the Wellspring, I'm not sure where you attended the support group and if it was led by the psychologist, by Dr. Peltier, but...
It had been at Wellspring, but with COVID, it was on Zoom.
Right, yeah,
And the leader was from the Tom Baker Cancer Center.
yeah, hopefully they can find her.
In the meantime, there are support groups, head and neck cancer support groups and laryngectomy groups that meet online. Facebook groups and just independent groups. We at Keck Medicine of USC, I mentioned that I go to two support groups. One is a head and neck cancer support group, and we're still meeting on Zoom. It's called Head and Neck Cancer Support International, and you're welcome to join that. We meet on the first Saturday of every month. Yeah. Everybody's welcome, wherever you are.
There's a question down here.
Hi, my question was, you talked about a loss of sense of smell. And I'm just can't understand the mechanisms behind that one. Like, is it the surgery or the airflow? Did you lose your sense of smell?
Well, I can't explain it medically, but I lost my sense of smell after the laryngectomy, and it's come back ever so slightly over the years. It's not fully functional yet.
It's, my understanding is it's largely due to the fact you're not breathing through your nose. So, you know, the sensory organ for the sense of smell is up at the very top of your nose, and so you have to bring those odors, those chemicals in through your nose. And, you know, if you sniff something, you kind of do this and you're really drawing them up. So when you have a laryngectomy and you're breathing through your stoma, there's no air passing through your nose, or very little. So it's much more passive. The air just kind of has to waft in there with the odors. I've met some exceptional people who have kind of trained themselves to actually be able to sort of sniff by swallowing. Yeah, so Julie can do that. Yeah. So there's an example of an exceptional person who can do this. But it's again, it's like relearning to do something differently. It's not just natural. It's not something you don't have to think about. You have to learn to do it, practice. Correct?
I'll just repeat. So she has trained herself to smell, and you can turn your smell off, which is a nice little trick. And your taste is also quite weak. It's completely gone. It is good. It's good. It's awesome. And your swallowing is quite not great. Okay. She has to chew a lot, but she can swallow.
Oh, sorry. We have one more question from the top here.
Well, then, are you going to let us do two? Final two. Okay, last one. So, one at the top, and then you're the last one.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your comments, and Bill, for that wonderful film. It's totally inspirational. Are you still in touch with the choir, and what's the future for them, and what's the future for you in terms of the next film?
My question is.
Joe, add that as a question for me. No, not what's the future of the choir, but what am I doing next? And I had him not ask me. So, but I'll answer it for you. The future, yes, the choir is still active. COVID shut them down, and they didn't do any live performances. They did a few things recorded. They just had a big concert a few days ago called From Silence into Song. And it was a collaboration with a bunch of visual artists as well, experimental visual artists. So I haven't seen it yet, but I've heard it's very good. So they continue to meet and function. What I'm doing now, I have a couple of ideas for a new film, but they're way too early to talk about. I'm really spending most of my time doing events like this, pitching events like this to universities, cancer advocacy groups. I really want, before I make the film available to international broadcast distribution, I really want the film to be seen by the people I think need to see it the most, and that's the cancer community. And by that, I mean patients, family, caregivers, physicians, clinicians. And so I'm focusing on that at least until the end of this year.
Thank you. The film's about meeting a challenge, and often with challenges comes frustrations, and we saw some of that in the film. But with all of these wise people here, what tools or devices or methods have you seen or do you advocate when dealing with patients who are struggling with frustration and potentially anger?
Yeah, I'm the psychologist in the crowd, I guess. You know, the rates of prevalence of depression and anxiety are incredibly high around the time of diagnosis and treatment. They tend to drop off, and then they peak again after the completion of treatment. And so there's many different interventions we know that are beneficial for people. So simple things like seeing a counselor. So we have social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists within psychosocial oncology that any person with cancer or your family can meet with one-on-one. We also have support groups. So that's a brilliant place to start. We also have programs like mindfulness-based cancer recovery, where you can learn how to do mindfulness meditation. We have yoga programs. There's the Alberta Cancer Exercise Program. All of these approaches are evidence-based treatments for anxiety, depression, anger, distress, all those difficult psychosocial consequences of being diagnosed with cancer. So, you know, visit the Alberta Cancer Care, Psychosocial Oncology Supportive Care website, and you'll see there's lots of different services that are available for people. And, you know, I really would encourage people to reach out and just try some of these things, because many of them can be very beneficial.
Thanks, Linda. So, thank you all for coming to the national premiere of this amazing film. And thank you all for your questions and for your attention. You've been a great audience, so thanks a lot.
Thank you.